Hello, hello. How's it going, people? I hope you are doing well out there with all the misery. If you can. If you don't have misery and you see people in misery, please don't make it worse by making fun of them. Um, you could be next. It's a beautiful morning. I think the moon is out, shining on the water. It was a slack tide earlier, so it was just dead calm water. Got a bunch of new yachts in yesterday. The manager's friends, I think. Pretty obnoxious. Stand there in the dock shooting daggers with their eyes and shit. I love it. And when that one big yacht came in and we kissed bows, the pilot of the big yacht did an expert job of docking and just barely kissing my bow. I love it. It was sweet. Very good. Ari and I had a bird's eye view from A and B docks. It's the deck from on land. So the pilot knew what she was doing. The captain knew what she was doing. I mean, I don't think the owner does. Which is why they hire pilots slash captains to get them safely from point to point. And Nari's having a tough time with all the new people. Just as she's getting used to the people on the dock, more people come in that just are rude and not very kind, and at the same time, not very considerate. It's all good. I'm not supposed to complain, you know? I don't. If I complain, they call the sheriff on me. Yeah. That was not a funny laugh. That was a sarcastic, facetious laugh. You can hear Ari snoring in the background. I've got a story for you. I promised you a story, so this is the good one. This is Mr. McGuire's Bull. The aliens and Bigfoot all in one. Mr. McGuire's Bull, the aliens and Bigfoot all in one. Here we go. All right, so the neighborhood I grew up in is a small little residential neighborhood that very quickly got built up by sort of some of the first manufactured housing in that area, really, even though the house I grew up in was a manufactured home. It's a little bit better of a manufactured home than the ones that came in, because the ones that they were popping up real quick and the property in the woods behind us, that got just wiped out very quickly. To build this neighborhood between the house and Mr. McGuire's farm down the hill, where the pond was, which was spring fed. It had an artesianal well feeding it back then. And this was old family property, actually. It was owned by some relatives of ours, and Mr. McGuire was even a relative, distant relative of ours. he had old timer, moonshiner, renegade. He had adopted this bull. He that was about to be retired. When I say retired, turned into dog food, and he just wouldn't have it because it was a prized bull. He just loved this bull so much. He would like trespass in his neighbor's yard and coveted this bull. And he and this bull had a wonderful relationship with one another. He was the only one that he could hand feed this bull. And this was a longhorn bull. This was no joke of a bull. He was massive. He was just barrel chested, massive, heavy front end, pointy horns, and just mean and snorty. And it in the dry seasons, when the dry season hit, and he would bring his face up out of the dirt, he would snort, and it would look like smoke coming out of his nose. He was a mean looking bull. And trespassers that would cut through his yard, which is fenced off between the pond and the swamp, that would take you down to this beautiful little Blackwater Creek where we would go swimming. You'd go through that fenced in area where the bull was. That was like a dare between everyone, right? I'd grown up watching this bull chase kids and mow them down. He didn't hurt them too bad, but some had been pricked by him, I would say. Not too badly, just some stitches. None were decapitated. But it was scary enough. This was a scary enough bull. He had built up a good reputation, of course, by Mr. McGuire's storytelling. Mr. McGuire built up the ego of this bull, actually. The stories that he would tell. For those of us kids that would dare to even go visit Mr. McGuire, because Mr. McGuire always had kittens, right? So us kids and chickens, ducks, all realm of animals that he would rescue. He was quite the greenhorn for animals, just had a beautiful handling of them. And was quite the drunk as well. Loved his woods. We would find him way out in the middle of the swamps, just kind of stumbling around. And then we realized that we had come upon the aftermath of a shining operation. he was helping the bottles get back home. Getting lost out there in the swamp. It was too funny. And he would like perch himself up on a tree, wouldn't really sit down, just perch himself up on a tree and tell us a story, like demand us talk to him, because nobody at home would talk to him. He just wanted to be listened to and share his story. So he was sharing this story one day. Me and some friends, my sisters and a couple friends, were going around the pasture where the bull was. We actually were smart enough. We went up the sandhill and went down the path and just took the extra quarter mile around to the Blackwater Creek. But the little part of woods we decided to go through was this little pine sapling field. And in this pine sapling field, there were these odd circular areas that were barren, just dusty, dry, barren. It was very strange, for sure. But the reason why we would go there is we would go up and climb to the tops, or near the tops of these pine saplings, push ourselves off of them from 18 to 20 foot up, and ride the sapling down, bending it down to the ground basically, and riding it down to the ground if we were lucky. And we were doing that. That was our fun thing. That was our swing, our Sandhills, Carolina pine sapling swing. So we were going through there, and that's where we find Mr. McGuire. He's perched up on one of these bent saplings from ages ago that grew back up, and it had this wonderful bend in it. It was made a perfect little seat. And he was just sitting there laughing at himself and couldn't find his way home with a couple of jugs and a box, and asked us to sit down with him. So we did. We sat down, and he shared a story with us. And the story was about how when he was a kid on that very same farm where he currently was, and that bull was in the neighboring field, which was the sandhill where the pine saplings are, he saw from the top of the hill, you could look down at the property down there where the pond is, and that used to be a field where the bull was. It was all clear. It wasn't any trees or anything. It was all farmland and cleared. And he said that he saw a vessel. He called it a vessel. He said he saw a vessel, floating ship. He thought it was an air balloon floating over the bull, and it was emitting a light that was kind of flashing and coming down around the bull, but not really on the bull. And the bull was looking up at it. And then it sat down. The bull sat down on its haunches, which would often do for some reason. It would just sit its ass down on the ground. And it just sat there looking at this vessel. And Mr. McGuire, as a young man, was looking down the hill. And he just felt alarmed. So he ran down as fast as he could, which is a good quarter of a mile from the top of the hill to maybe about right at a quarter of a mile to where the bull was pinned up, because he was fearing for the bull. Didn't have any concern for himself. And he's running down. He sees this vessel begin to shift and come towards him. And so midway, he starts to slow down and gets concerned about himself. And so he tucks in behind this, up in this briar patch that was under this oak tree. Getting all ripped up. And this vessel comes right over him, shines a light right on him, spots him, and he's like, oh well, what the hell? So he pops through the briar bush and runs down towards the bull, because he can hear the bull messing around with the fencing. He's thinking the bull might have gotten caught up in the barbed wire. So he was once again concerned more about the bull than he was himself. So he shot out of that briar patch and ran to the bull. And the bull had gotten over the fence, jumped over the fence, and its back left hoof had caught on some barbed wire, and it broke through, because this bull was just huge. It did cut the bull, but this bull was hauling ass towards him. So they're running headlong at each other. He's trying to save the bull, and the bull's trying to save him from this craft. And all of a sudden, the craft just disappears, just vanishes. He said it just went to nothing. There was no lights, no vessel, nothing. It was just all gone. And the bull stopped, and he stopped, and they both looked up at the sky, were looking around, and then they looked at each other. And the bull sat down on his haunches and huffed. And just wouldn't budge. Wouldn't budge. Would not budge until Mr. McGuire, as a young man, went up and had to tug him off of his butt to get him back in his pen. But they both experienced this UFO. And now, as he's putting him back in his pen, this is just right after the craft disappears, right? Off in the distance in the swamp, which was actually pretty heavy swamp at that time behind that field, big old trees, huge loblollies and big old oak and all kinds of underbrush that's common for South Carolina swamp and Blackwater Creek area. Huge old timber. So it was heavy, dark wood right behind the field where the bull was. And the bull's resisting the whole way. Does not want to go back in his pen. He's actually trying to go over to the house, to his house, to Mr. McGuire's house, not his owner's house, but over to Mr. McGuire's house. So he's pulling Mr. McGuire over to his house. And he actually comes up onto the porch and sets his ass down on the porch. This big old bull sets his ass down on the porch and just sits there and won't budge. And so Mr. McGuire's, this is about 3 to 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. And the bull's sitting on the porch. And Mr. McGuire's sitting on the porch next to him. He's a kid. He's a young man. He's around 17, 18 years old. He's a young man. They're both sitting on the porch. And the bull starts to kind of snort. And he gets up on his haunches, gets down off of the porch, and he starts rustling the ground with his hooves, snorting towards the field. Mr. McGuire, as the kid, looks over at the field in the swamp. He can see some lights. And the bull's beginning to get real agitated and looking off in the woods in that direction behind his pen, behind his field. And back then, there were no lights, but it was a full moon. And so the moon was right over, catching some light up against the trees that were right up against the field. And so you could kind of see just the edge, just the slightest green of the trees that was shining in a full moon. And there were these lights that he thought was a moon at first coming up out of the forest. He would just see them sparkle, almost like a lantern. He said it was like a lantern, but it was not moving, like it was too high to have been a lantern. Somebody walking with a lantern. And those disappeared. The bull kind of calmed down. But still wouldn't let him bring him to the pen. And Mr. McGuire was trying to get him back to the pen. But he did let him bring him over to the barn, which was in Mr. McGuire's family house, next to the house. So he let him bring him over there to the barn, and there was a little pen right there next to it. And he let him into the barn, and he stayed there. He just sat down and he just stayed there. He was like almost cowering and shivering a bit from what Mr. McGuire was saying. And then Mr. McGuire heard these strange howl, growl coming from the swamp, the edge of the swamp, and he looks behind him, and that bull literally like tucks his head in the sand almost, cowering at the sound of this thing that was making the noise. Mr. McGuire looks up behind him, and there, up against the trees, just stepping out of the trees, is this huge creature. This hairy man, Mr. McGuire said. He called it another name, too, because he was part indigenous, like all of us were, right? In the South. A little bit of indigenous, a little bit of African American, a little bit of everything. Whole lot of Irish, whole lot of Scots. So, in Norwegian, we're oddly in that area. Anyhow, so Mr. McGuire sees this freaking creature, and he just freezes. And said that he peed himself. And ran back to his house, ran up to his room, didn't even change out of his pee pants, just tucked himself up in his bed up under his covers, and didn't come out until the sun was good and out. The next day, that same day, he just wouldn't come out. It scared him so bad. So that was his first time seeing aliens. As well as a Bigfoot in the same night. And that's the story of Mr. McGuire's bull, the aliens, and the Bigfoot. I hope you enjoyed the story. You have a good morning, good night, and good afternoon. And if you're not having one, damn it, make it a good one. Ciao for now.